Well, hello. Okay, so we got things worked out. Yeah, guys, welcome. It is time for a Younger Creationist discussion. It's been a long time since we had one of those, and I guess having a discussion to get up to date with Kent kind of, I don't know, piqued my interest back with Younger Creationism stuff because, I don't know, that's kind of where I started. Not feeling too great right now. I'm a little bit sound out of it. I apologize. Got some stuff going on, but I'm going to muddle through this, and I'm going to be enthusiastic because I really am. Like, I do love doing these things. But I do have two people to kind of help me with this particular discussion, and I got Dapper Dan in here. Hi, Dapper Dan.
Who's Dapper Dan?
Dapper Dino?
Dapper Dino. Yeah, whatever. Why did I put Dapper
God.
Dino? I don't see. I told you I'm not doing well. Let me fix that.
Sound kind of out of it.
Yeah.
It even said Dapper Dan on my name.
Yeah, I did. That's why I said it. And we got Cheshire Cheese.
Hey.
Cheshire. And then we have somebody from Facebook that I met in a group for creationism. His name's Mike. He is a young creationist, and I kind of invited him on to not specifically like go over the real kind of arguments of creationism that I don't really feel arguments, but I mean more want to have a conversation of why somebody is a younger creationist, because every time I ask that question I get different responses, and then I see, like recently you have Matt Powell and Ken Hovind teaming up, which is just frightful, just morbidly frightful, because they are just such morally reprehensible people. It's unbelievable.
The video of the two of them and their matching jumpers and matching t-shirts
Right?
gave a little bit of a Halloween spook, I'm not gonna lie.
It was creepy, and it was actually, I think, Hemet that pointed that out, because I didn't notice it. And,
although Kent not knowing Matt Powell's name.
do you think he was serious on that?
I actually don't, because he asks literally everyone that, and he can't know no one's name.
Yeah, I think he was kidding.
More of like he messed it up at the time, but was like, when you get like a bit of a brain fart, it seemed like a bit of a brain fart that he played off.
Well, Matt wants to be the next Ken Hovind, apparently. Yeah, I mean, they both think it's quite all right for the government to kill gay people merely because they're gay.
He's got some stiff competition in Steve for Mrs. Hovind number. What are we on now? 6,
4, 5 and a half,
5, something like that. Who knows?
5 and a half.
But all right. So, anyways, Mike, welcome. Let's kind of like dive in here. So, tell us about yourself, Mike, and how long you've been a young creationist, and then we'll kind of get into why.
My name's Mike. I grew up in PA. I became a Christian probably at the age I'd like to say 17. Now I wasn't always young Creationist. There was a time I was an old Earth Creationist actually, but I'd say I've been roughly a young Earth. I'd say a good 15 years now.
When you say old Earth Creationist, you mean like the I do shows with an organization called Reasons to Believe, or I did shows with them. You ever heard of them?
I've heard of him. I don't know much of him.
Dr. Fuzrana and Hugh Ross.
I know. I do know. Yeah, I do know his teachings. Use Ross.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He's given me many books to read. He's a really great guy. But that he kind of promotes the old Earth creationism approach. But
right.
So what made you think that the young Earth creationists? I mean, okay, granted, obviously you're a Christian, right?
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And so. You're going to be a creationist, either old Earth or young Earth, some kind, or theistic evolutionist. But what is it about young Earth that makes you think that is actually what is vertical? That is actually what comports with their reality, contrary to kind of like, what we would say is, we don't see any evidence for young Earth creationism. So is it faith-based, or is it, what's your reason?
Well, it's a mixture of both, to be honest. It's faith, and not just faith, but it's also evidence too. I believe that there is evidence that does point to the Earth being young. Now, I'm not one to hold a particular 6,000 dogmatic year because I'm a Christian, and therefore I believe what the Bible says. So I'm not going to hold true to 6,000 years. I just say it's a young Earth.
So is there like a maximum that you would give? Like,
yes, how young is young?
I would say, in my view, I would say 6 to 10,000 years old.
Okay, that's a fairly normal range for young Earth creationism.
Yeah. I would say young creation is anyone between 6 and 10,000. Sure. I mean, even if somebody said 50,000, I'd probably still put him under a type of young Earth, not the most common.
I mean, heck, if you said 50 million, I'd still be like, that's pretty recent.
I mean, anything under 4 billion, you're probably might be considered to be young Earth. But okay, so how'd you get started in that? Was it some books you read, or teachings, or videos you watched, or?
I just got to say it through my grandfather. My grandfather was actually an old Earth creationist at the time. The more I kept reading the Bible, and I started reading different books by different people, and especially where you get into the Gospels, where Jesus says at the beginning, Satan was the murderer at the beginning, and Jesus says about God created them male and female in the beginning of creation. So, I mean, a lot of that started directing me how I thought. Like, why would Jesus say that if creation was, 4.5 billion years ago? It just, I can't, to me, I can't read into millions of years.
What do you think about the people that reconcile the science, which that shows it's billions of years, with the scripture, which you're interpreting as being less than that?
Right. I hold faith, someone is saved by grace through faith alone, through Christ, whether they can be an evolutionist or whether they be an old Earth or young Earth, we're all saved the same way. It's not a different method, so.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just ask real quick? So you said you can't read millions of years into it. So instead you read less number of years into it, since a number of years is not specified?
No. Like, I read, like, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, I believe that by faith. Okay, yeah. Well, I take that same faith of in the beginning God, and day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and so forth.
Right. So you're like, I can't read millions of years into this amount of time, but maybe what I'm asking is, what makes you read any amount of time into that besides the 6 days being interpretive?
Well, it's just not through faith alone. Most of it's all based off of faith, my belief. But like when you start talking like diamonds and coal and oil and stuff like that, to me that's all has carbon-14 in it. So that would indicate to me of a young Earth. Wow. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what.
You're not using the Bible to interpret the amount of time. You're using the Bible to inform yourself and then interpreting data from there.
Through biblical lens is what some people would have said. Yes.
All right, cool. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So okay. So you mentioned carbon-14. I don't want again too technical. You both Dapper and I were ex-Navy nukes, so we do have a little bit of experience with radiological things and dealing with half-lives and things of that nature. But every time I look at a creationist argument when it deals with carbon-14, as somebody who has at least a basic understanding of the physics, I recognize that every one of those claims is not based upon a proper or sound understanding of physics. And I think Dapper would agree upon that.
I would agree. Well, I know with one exception, which is
concept of C14. Oh, good.
I would say that the physics underlying the C14 in Diamond's paper wasn't necessarily wrong. Instead, what was wrong was that they didn't actually bother to check for carbon-14. They checked for beta minus decay, which has more than one source. Uh-huh. And also, they ignored the possibility of newly formed carbon-14.
Yeah, it depends on whether it's androgenous carbon-14 or not. And the carbon-14 that they found in like things like diamonds and things of that nature is not endogenous, and it's not actually.
They also didn't actually demonstrate it was carbon-14.
Yeah, and the thing also is that you only find those kind of beta decay daughters in coal and alluvial diamonds that have been really close in proximity to thorium or uranium deposits. So if you look at a diamond that has not been near a thorium or uranium deposit, it doesn't have those beta decays, and it wouldn't indicate any type of carbon-14 or any other type of beta emitter. So we only find that in very specific types of sources, which explains why. It has nothing to do with the age of the Earth. It just has to do with the source has been contaminated. That's all.
Whereas we would expect similar amounts of carbon-14 in any sample of coal if the explanation, or actually we just expect similar beta decay rates in any sample of coal or diamond or whatever, if the explanation were that most of the geological formations of the Earth were just laid down in a flood somewhere around 4,000 to 8,000 years ago.
Right.
So that prediction, which is what you would make if the flood is the explanation for this, which is the normal young Earth creationist view, has been falsified, and the actual beta decay that we're finding in these samples is well in line with expectations from a, I guess, standard view of geology and science.
So, Mike, let me ask. I mean, do you really look into the physics at all when you see those types of claims from your Earth creationists?
I'm open. I mean, you give me data to research, data to read. I'm open. Yeah, I'm not a closed-minded person at all. I mean, so I'm open to all sorts of things. But also in those things, there's a lot of assumptions being made.
Well, everything.
I think that it's sort of, assumptions are. Well, yeah, assumptions are necessary. Like, you have to make assumptions. You have to make assumptions if you're using faith. You have to make assumptions if you're using science. It's just a matter of, are you justified in those assumptions, or are you not justified? And if you're not justified, why or why not? And if you are justified, why or why not? As well as some things you just kind of have to, you don't have any other choice but to make that assumption. So when you live, if you want to go philosophy direction, you go, well, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? Well, maybe you don't, but you have to live your life as if you're not, because you don't really have any other option but to assume you're not a brain in a vat.
I also want to point out something important about a lot of what are called assumptions in scientific investigations, which are in fact conclusions from other parts of science. A quick example would be if I want to calculate, say, how hard a hypothetical asteroid would impact the Earth and what the effects would be. In that, I'm going to be using the universal gravitation, or the gravitational constant, right? That's a big part of that calculation. But I just assume it has the conventional value. But that's not because I'm just picking a value out of thin air. What that is that there have been many, many experiments over centuries to determine what the gravitational constant is in this universe that we live in. And based on those conclusions, I can now assume it in later work. I don't have to do that work again. And so when it comes to things like radiometric dating, the assumptions that are in there are the conclusions of earlier science. So for instance, the assumption that decay rates stay constant is something that isn't assumed. It's something that's already been tested. So now we can assume it. Well,
I think we have to assume that they stay constant. That is an assumption that goes into Hume's problem of induction. So, we're fine with assuming that decay rates that we believe are constant will stay constant. We have absolutely no reason to accept otherwise, and it would be very bad if they weren't constant. So yeah, it's an assumption, but it's an assumption that we have to take, or else physics kind of falls apart.
Well, I mean, I think it's also fine a lot of the time to go the opposite way and say, okay, let's assume that Christianity, specifically young Earth creationism, is true. What do you expect to see? What does the Earth look like if this is accurate? What cues do we look for, either in the natural development of society or the development of human language or historical records? What do you expect to see if the Earth is X amount old, and then compare it to what we do see and see whether it lines up or whether it's accurate? I mean, you can make assumptions or guesstimations or hypothesis either way, sure, and then kind of see where you end up.
Now, would we be assuming that the present is key to the past?
Well, I mean, we also make certain assumptions that there's a uniformity of nature out there, that the things of the future and the present are going to be similar to what we just see in the past. There's no reason not to. I mean, do you not think that there's a continuance of events? I mean, do you think that 5 minutes ago you didn't exist? No, you have to assume that you did, right? You have to, or else it just wouldn't lend to reasonable, rational thinking in society if you thought to yourself you just popped into existence a minute ago.
It is a little bit more nuanced, though, that everything in the past would be similar to today. It's generally that physics is not going to vary through time.
But we don't even have to go back that far, though, too, right? Because I mean, Dapper, you're 100% right. You make a great point, but we don't. If you decide to focus the question around young Earth creationism and focusing around this 10,000 to 6,000 years, you don't need to go back millions or billions to be like, well, is physics still the same? We don't have to go back that far. Again, you can just look at human society and you can use the Bible as a reference and say, okay, if the Tower of Babel happened, when, where, and how? And so if language was something that was created by God when everybody was separated around, you now have a point, an initiation point almost of each of those languages. So then you can decide, well, okay, if that's the case, which languages were created and how long would it take for humans to develop and change them over a societal amount of time? One of the major issues with things like Noah's flood and that such a short period of time between Noah's flood and the present, depending on how far back you decide to put Noah's flood, is how many people would have to have bred and existed to create individual societies, not just around the planet, but just enough to have the story of Moses be accurate.
Now that's a good question, since you brought it up about speciation coming off the ark. Yeah, if Noah's flood would be true, does anyone know any numbers on how fast we can get a new speciation? Between with the dog kind and like the deer kind, the cat kind.
We do have some rough estimates. Now, one of the problems is that it doesn't always take the same amount of time to speciate. But we do know that speciation generally is, even in relatively fast breeding species, is something that's going to take somewhere around decades or multiple hundreds of generations typically.
Generations, yeah.
Right. Now, the biggest problem isn't the dogs. The biggest problem is the proboscideans, because there are somewhere around 340 proboscideans. And according to at least most, now I'm not going to hold you to this, but according to most major young Earth creationist groups, we have proboscideans reaching their fullest diversity about 150 years after the flood. But the problem is that at proboscidean reproduction rates, you only get about 180 individuals at that point, but there are over 300 species. Proboscideans are elephants and the things that are like elephants, so like mastodons and other things you probably haven't heard of, like Platypelodon and Gomphothir.
I imagine you run into a whole nother problem of how do you speciate, how do you have a family of animals when you only have two to work with? The genetics would not function. The number
that is also a problem, yeah.
From my reading, again, it's been a little while, so don't quote me on the exact number, but from my understanding, the number of necessary to have enough genetic diversity for humans is you have to have, I think the minimum number was 6D, as in 60. You'd have to have a minimum of 60 unrelated individuals to be able to procreate without genetic problems.
And the ARC posits a effective population size of 5, because you got to remember that you can't count Noah's sons individually, because all of them are just a combination of he and his wife. So Noah and his wife are actually the only two that have new genetic diversity in the 8, besides the wives.
And the wives,
and his son's wives,
the wives of his son.
So his sons don't actually count for that number. So you're, and we actually know.
Even if you did count them, it's still not quite enough.
Right, 8 is not great, but it's actually 5, which is an even worse problem. And it also then means that most species start off with an effective population size of 2, which is usually enough to send a sexually reproducing species into what's called an extinction vortex, where they just don't have enough genetic diversity to adapt to new circumstances, even with a full 2 effective population size, which is the best you can get.
Let's try to bring it back down a little bit, because I didn't want to get into the technical stuff. So yeah, because I don't think it's just. I mean, it's just not going to.
Yeah, we don't want to overwhelm you.
Right.
It's just,
yeah, I'm following what he's saying. Yeah, I get what he's saying, so it's all right.
So let me ask Mike. You know, one of the reasons why I think young Earth creationism is dangerous is because it misleads people informational-wise and scientific-wise. There's just certain things that we do know for what would be what's called a scientific fact. These are not some things that we spend a lot of time reevaluating. I mean, if we did that, then science would never progress. We'd get nowhere if we have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to do something. So there's things in science that we just know is the case. Science knows the age of the Earth. It's just a fact. I mean, we don't know the specific second or anything, but we can narrow a range down of probabilities. What to say, the further you get away from that 4.5 billion years, the less probable until you have like we can safely say that the Earth didn't get created yesterday, right? I mean, everybody would agree upon that, unless you're into the phallus hypothesis, which last Tuesday is or something. But it's I was
getting too technical.
Well, I don't think it's technical to say, look, if we accept that the Earth wasn't born yesterday, and we just get an error bar, the error bar is going to be somewhere in 4.5, 4.6 billion years. It's not going to be even close to like 4 billion. That's going to be untenable. So when we're talking about young creationism, it literally goes against what we can demonstrate, what we can explain, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's so detrimental to people, because they teach students misinformation when they go into these colleges. They don't have the concepts right. They just don't. They don't understand the biology. They don't understand the physics. They don't understand things because it doesn't comport with what they've been told by the young Earth creationists, and that's why I personally find it dangerous. It's a dangerous movement. It really is. And that's why I do want it to find out why people believe it. If it's strictly because of the Bible, is it strictly because, they don't understand the science? Because one thing that even some scientists that are younger creationists say is, okay, yeah, the science says otherwise, but you know what? We have faith that it's not the case. And that to me isn't a healthy way of forming a worldview. It should be, okay, let's look at what we do know, what we can find out, and then shape our worldview to that. And if that incorporates a God, that's okay, that's fine. That's up to you. But you don't start with the God first and formulate the worldview around that. I don't see how that's tenable to me. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, to me, uniformity in nature, I mean, David Hume struggled with this a lot. To me, how can you account for that? Just to say that you assume something's going to be like it is tomorrow's, you're assuming it. Sure. If it's not, well, all science is based on assumptions. It always.
But again, what's the problem with that?
That's actually the biggest assumption of science. But we can actually use proxies to test whether or not science has reasonable assumptions, which is to say, does science actually continue to be able to make accurate predictions that allow us to
we can use
it in the world in a reliable manner?
Is it reasonable for you to assume that if you open your door, it's going to lead outside of your house? And when you're coming back to your house, is it unreasonable to assume that when you open that door, it's going to lead you back into your house? Like, is that an unreasonable assumption? Because at the end of the day, if you want to say it's an assumption, it is. You have to assume that. You can't see past the door.
Right. All I'm looking for is just some type of explanation other than assume that how you got to plan your life out tomorrow and next week and so forth.
But again, that's what she's saying. Look, how would you live your life if you had to assume every time you got out of bed there was no floor to put your feet on? How would you function?
Well, I wouldn't have to assume that because I believe the God of the Bible has revealed to me that some operation of the universe is going to have regularity and formularity and so forth.
Yeah, God can change his mind anytime.
Right.
God's God.
How do you know that God hasn't decided to remove your floor?
Yeah.
Well, we know that God does make changes like that via miracles in the Bible. He suspends or changes the rules of physics.
That's exactly what a miracle would be, right?
Right, so you have to assume that God has not changed those rules in the interim time between when you were standing on your floor to when you were asleep to when you woke up.
Yeah, because the uniform of nature, God has broken himself. I mean, he has violated natural law.
And by the way, your assumption is not a bad one. I'm not saying you shouldn't make that assumption. It's just an example of a reason.
Right, but I mean, as far as my basis of belief in God is, without God, you can't know any fact of the universe without God. Yeah, I'm more of a Greg Bonson disciple than anything, to
But
be
that
honest.
doesn't answer the question, though. The question is that, look, you still have to assume God has not removed that floor from you underneath your feet,
Well,
God, right? You still have to. There's no other way but to assume that, because God could do it. He can create miracles. He can suspend the law of nature.
It'd be very difficult to assume that you know the mind of God so well to know when He is and is not going to perform a miracle, right?
Well, to me, that certainly wouldn't be the God of Christianity if that was true.
Why?
It's because what God has revealed in the Bible gives clarity on the uniformity of nature. God's nature doesn't change.
But God has violated that before, right? I mean, let's look for example. Let's look at the crucifixion or something like that. A natural law would state that nobody can come back from the dead, even though the Bible has like 4 or 5 people come back from the dead. So that would be a natural law. God has suspended that. So before anybody ever came back from the dead, somebody had said, look, God has revealed to me in a way that nobody can come back from the dead because that would violate the uniform nature. And God says uniform nature is He'll keep. Oh, look, Christ came back from the dead. That assumption would have been false, right? So
Well, that's like an extreme example. You don't even have to use something like that. You can go into God granting people's visions and allowing them to do things that they otherwise... Hell, God made a bear maul a bunch of kids. And so something that the bear would not have otherwise done. God went out of His way to interrupt the uniformity of nature and what the bear would and would not have been doing, and whether or not a bear would have actually even been average to see in that location at that time, God interfered and had that bear go and attack some kids. So, and you know, there's plenty of examples in the Bible of God messing with the uniformity of things on purpose, sometimes to the detriment of people.
Well, I would just say God is not being deceptible or deceivable when He does those means, because He foretells and He predicts these events prior to hand. So He's not being deceptive, if that's what you guys are getting at.
No,
I'm
we're
not
saying deceptive.
that He like, if you're going to say that, hey, no, God doesn't do this thing, we're giving examples of God doing that thing.
Yeah.
Now, He doesn't have to necessarily be deceptive to do those things. It's just something that the Bible says that God did.
And it's a simple line of reasoning that you have to assume God's not going to do a miracle and change the uniform nature again. You have to assume that. God could. God could do whatever He wants, right? I mean, you have to admit that if God wanted to do another miracle, He certainly could, couldn't He?
Well, I believe in the God in the Bible revealed Himself that He changes not.
So
I don't think change it.
Talking about God, though, not change.
Yeah, I'm not saying God changes. I'm saying God can create a miracle, can He?
Well, sure. I mean, if it's in His will, sure.
Okay, so let's assume it's in His will, and God creates a miracle that has now violated the uniform of nature, correct?
It has. Well, I mean, you take it as that. I wouldn't take it as that. Because, I mean, like I said, as long as the earth abides, the Bible says that there's going to be uniformity in nature. Sure, if God wants to step out from outside of the earth and intervene, He can do that on His own principle. He's the creator.
Well, let me give you an example, and because, all right, do you remember there's an instance in the Bible where during a battle, God makes the sun stand still so that, despite the fact that, according to the report in the Bible, the battle takes significantly longer than a single, period of daylight would take, the sun doesn't set until the Israelites are victorious. This is a fairly famous story from the Bible. It is my contention that typically the sun continues to move at 15 degrees an hour across the sky nonstop, and that is a very regular and predictable thing. So in this particular instance, if we're going to take this passage as a literal historical event, it means that God took that normal 15 degree an hour travel across the sky and said, nope, you're going to not travel for however long. It's ambiguous as to exactly how long it was. And then you can continue to travel, or something else will happen that makes that day end. That, to me, seems like a very clear change in the regular operation of the universe, because we have a regular thing. Sun always moves 15 degrees an hour. all the time, no matter where you are on Earth, no matter what's going on anywhere else. But this time it didn't. So I think it's fair to assume that normally, if you believe in God, that he's not all the time willy-nilly changing the laws of nature. But if you're going to be a Christian and accept that story as a historical event, it means at least at that point, he did change the uniform operation of nature, which means that even if you assume he normally doesn't, you can't be sure that he's not going to in any given instance.
And that's a simple line of reasoning. I mean, do you agree with that, Mike?
It shouldn't, by the way, it hit your face.
I think when God acts upon his creation with man out of supernatural, because that's what that would be, is you're suspending, you got an outside entity suspending the laws. But every time God does that, almost every single time, he is forewarning man what he's going to do. So I mean, I don't have any issues with it myself. No.
So
I'm
you're
not
saying
asking to have an issue.
Well, I think maybe I understand where we're getting caught up a little bit. So basically, you're saying is that you don't have to assume God performed a miracle and removed your floor while you aren't looking, because if he was going to do that, he would let you know ahead of time.
Right. I mean, he said, as long as the earth, the Bible says in Genesis, as long as the earth remains, there's going to be summer, heat, winter, and so forth. Therefore, I can plan and base my life off his principles of the Bible. I can reason and do induction and use causation. I don't see any other worldview that can even compete with that, to be honest.
I use them.
You're saying that you don't have to make any assumptions, because if there was going to be a change, God would alert you to those changes ahead of time, so that way there would be no issue of making any kind of assumption that God is going to do or not do something.
Yeah, I mean, God doesn't necessarily have to tell people that he's going to do something. I mean, again, I think you're limiting God there. If you're going to believe in God, then you have to kind of accept that God can do whenever he wants, whenever he wants. And if that's the case, and it does follow, then you have to assume that he's not going to change the uniform of nature. And your worldview is no different than anybody else's. You just have a different assumption. Everybody has to have certain assumptions. And so your assumption is that God's not going to change things. You have no way of knowing that for sure. God can do what he wants.
There's certainly passages and stories or instances in the Bible where God does impose his will on people with no warning. Again, we'll go back to Egypt. He removes Pharaoh's free will, imposes his own will on Pharaoh instead. So Pharaoh does not let the slaves go when he was going to, after Moses and God have been telling him to for so long. So when he finally makes the decision to let them go, God says, nope, hardens Pharaoh's heart. He imposes his own will on Pharaoh without Pharaoh's knowledge and without Pharaoh's informing Pharaoh ahead of time, and says that, no, I'm not going to let you let all the slaves go. In fact, you're going to make a new punishment based on the fact that I'm not letting you say, let my people go anymore, right?
Well, I think, so here's one thing. I'm not here to try to make you not believe in God. That's not my shtick.
No.
But I think it's reasonable to say that it seems like everyone here normally operates with the assumption that for whatever reason, the universe operates according to predictable rules, and that is something that generally stays the same going forward in time. And I would hope we're all going to be in agreement that it generally stays the same going backwards in time. That, the laws of physics themselves work in the past, and they're going to work in the future. And if we can all agree that that is a reasonable way to approach the natural world for scientific investigation, which I'll grant that might not work very well for investigating a particular miracle in history, because if that's an exception to this general principle, then we can't really investigate it in the same way. But generally speaking, the world operates this way. Can we all at least agree that that's the case?
Sure.
Mike, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely uniformity in nature. If not, we couldn't make sense of anything. So yeah.
Let me nail out these. Let me just quickly nail out these super chats real quick. Josiah Hanson, my friend, $2. It's like old non-sec. Happy. That's the same thing like Cheshire said actually before. She's like, oh, this is going to be like an old non-sequitur episode. I'm not even fronting. That's exactly what she had said. Helios, $5.75, $5. Thank you, Helios. He says, I'm going to list all the times that Noah's flood broke physics, but it took over 300 characters, so too long, didn't read for money's sake, literally everything.
I mean, if we did want to have a show where we got into the details of problems with Noah's Ark as a literal historical
that would
event,
take hours and hours. There's so many problems with Noah's Ark.
That would be not a singular show. That would be a few.
And
but
it's been
again,
talked about many
I don't
times.
understand why people actually have this discussion for literalists, only because all you really have to say is, well, why didn't the boat that Noah built break? Because of the way wood and water works. And they say, God did it. The answer is God told him to build that boat in a specific way, and God protected the boat. End of conversation.
Actually, I don't think anywhere in the Bible it says God protected the boat. I don't think there was.
It doesn't have to.
I mean, they can obviously invoke that, sure, but go for wood and pitch. But
I mean, my question just turns into, why the fuck you make him build a boat then? He was old.
So Dapper, where were you at?
So what I was saying is that since we can all come to this agreement that basically the universe, at least we can default to the assumption that it operates consistently. That's ultimately what the idea behind the present is the key to the past. It's not so much that now at one point it was the idea that only processes we can see today can be used to explain the past, but that has since been superseded in science by the idea that if it's the laws of physics, we can have different physical environments than we have now, but we still have to use physics to explain what we're seeing. So for instance, there are kinds of rock that you can find on Earth that we can't find forming now, but we understand enough about chemistry and physics to understand how they could form, and so that is our explanation for how they did form. For instance, we have banded iron deposits. You can't form those if you have too much free oxygen, and so we know that right now the Earth can't form it because we've got too much oxygen, so therefore we say, well, at some point the Earth didn't have a whole bunch of free oxygen. And so one of the things I find in a lot of young Earth creationist circles is they kind of give a caricature of how we think about science in terms of explaining the distant past, where we just kind of never progressed from Charles Lyell in, like the late 18th century. But that's not the case. We have, in fact, come a long way in our understanding of things like, how catastrophes fit into geology, the scale of the universe, how circumstances in the past can be different and result in different effects in the present that we can still see. So that's the reason I bring that up, is because you said, the present is the key to the past, which was Charles Lyell's kind of motto, but we've moved on from that particular scientist. So
and in philosophy as well. I mean, in philosophy, we don't sit there and think, all the time, hey, did everything pop into existence? These are non-explored ideas any longer. It's weird that a creationist, though, has to try to look at all these different branches of science and just say, look, everything's wrong. All this is wrong, and yet they can't show why it's wrong. They just basically say it's wrong because, well, our belief that it's wrong. But as a critical thinker, we all have beliefs, and there's nothing wrong with beliefs. Beliefs lead to knowledge. But I think there's a question of where you have to start your foundations from. I know that Plantinga argues that belief in God is a properly basic belief. I think it's absolutely wrong on that. Is it a basic belief? Possible. I might be able to concede it's a basic belief, but properly basic, absolutely not, because there's just certain conditions that it doesn't meet, like having to be universal, having to be necessary for everybody to accept that God exists. That's a far different cry than from somebody saying, well, the universe exists because God exists and must exist because God says so, and somehow kind of relate everything to God that way. But you can't start with God first and say, okay, God first, and then everything after that. I don't see a reasonable way of having a belief system like that. Does that kind of make sense? Because we don't see God first.
Well, see, I was upfront about my position of what I believe in, but I don't know what you guys believe in. Like each individual, do you guys believe in the Bible or naturalism or atheism?
I'm an agnostic, and and I don't have a belief that God exists. I don't believe God does not exist. I don't hold to ontological naturalism. I do tend to, obviously, methodological naturalism, but I'm not a naturalist, although I see virtue in being a naturalist, absolutely, when it comes to science. But I wouldn't consider myself a naturalist, no. But in science, I think you kind of have to be in some capacity, be a naturalist, because you can't posit supernatural causation. So for the most part, you at least have methodological naturalism, right? And then Dapper doesn't really talk about his positions. He's a dinosaur. He doesn't really know.
Yeah, so I actually don't talk about my my religious views for a very specific reason, and it's that I try to confine my discussions to evidenced science, and I am firmly of the belief that anyone of any religious position can both do science and also can interpret science in the way that is consistent with the data. And I do make tiny exceptions, like, for instance, I'm speaking broadly. I do think Christians can do this, but I do think there are certain varieties of Christian, which unfortunately includes young earth creationism, that can't do that consistently. But as long as you are willing to engage with the science honestly, I am not going to have a fight with you over your other, like, metaphysical or spiritual beliefs. And for that reason, I don't bother giving out mine, because I don't talk about that.
Yeah, and I consider myself to be a friendly agnostic. And when a friendly atheist or friendly agnostic is somebody who says, basically, look, they're not wanting to abolish religion. They can see that there might be some benefits to religion, though obviously I think there's some harm to it as well. And then the question is, does one outweigh the other? Can you have benefits of religion without having the atrocities of religion and the negative side of religion? I don't know. But I think the verdict is still out on that to some degree.
I think it's actually pretty clearly you can. I mean, look at all those historical atrocities committed by Jains. Oh, wait. There's none, because they worry themselves to death over stepping on an ant.
Yeah. But and of course, they're not a monotheistic religion either, though.
Kind of yes, kind of no. It's complicated to get to chronic religions.
Yeah. But I mean,
I'm an atheist, but I am not a wishy-washy nonsense lack theist. I do not believe God exists.
Nor are you a damn fence sitter, Steve.
Yes, Steve.
So does that kind of answer your question? So a little bit of mix of everything in here.
Yeah.
Oh, is he muted?
Oh, you're muted. He's muted.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I just love the fact that we all got different backgrounds here, and we're not beating each other up over nothing.
No, not at all. Matter of fact, I've really honed the channel away from that kind of stuff. I'm not really into the in-your-face, shouting match discussion debates. I mean, I can't say that I haven't been a part of them, but it's just, I mean, I've moved on since those things, and obviously, I mean, I don't have the energy level any longer. I don't have the. I don't know. I think that the friendly conversations where there's a possibility of actual dialogue and people communicating are far more interesting for me to do and far more interesting for people to listen to. And the ones that want the shouty matches, there's other places for that.
It's a time and place thing. There are certainly times where you are going to get something that ends up being maybe considered a little bit more hostile, or even if it's contentious. There will be dumpster fires sometimes. It's bound to happen when you end up, but we've had more. I think Steve and I have had more dumpster fire conversations with atheists recently than we've had with anybody
without question.
Oh yeah,
so,
without question.
Yeah, so it's certainly not meant. A dumpster fire is not limited to one position. Dumpster fires can happen with anything and anyone at any time. They spontaneously combust once in a while, but I think Steve and I are not the people, and even Dapper too, I don't think, are people who tend to purposefully cause dumpster fires. They kind of just show up in our backyard sometimes.
Yeah, I stumble into them every once in a while.
Yeah, it's it's the nature of the beast. It's par for the course. I get that. It's just that, to me, there's nothing that comes, from them. I mean, look what happened when we had David Smalley on. That was one of those contentious atheist experiences I've ever had in my life. Nothing good came from that. All it did was show that he really didn't know anything about atheism, and it was a lot of bravado. And then you have these people that have such a facade that they have to like put on that he's some kind of great atheist activist podcast or whatever. But when you get asked the hard questions and you basically lose your shit over it, that's not the kind of person
have you been
I
in
want
a
to have.
debate though?
Yeah, but bro, have you been in a debate? It's like it boggles my mind because I'd rather talk to a theist that I disagree with, at least have it civil and cordial.
Oh, there's something amusing about the absolute. Some guests demand a dumpster fire, like they want the dumpster fire.
No other way.
Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly like not like Steve and I can't be, I guess, retaliatory in that sense. Like, hey, listen, if you bring a dumpster fire to my backyard, I mean, I guess I'm gonna have to deal with it. But I mean, we certainly don't invite people on for the sake of that.
And I definitely have to be a little bit more different mindset. I don't have that mindset these days as much, and I certainly don't have today. You can probably hear in my voice, I'm just not doing that great, but I'm going to make it through. I'm going to survive.
Do you mind if I ask Mike a question?
That's what he's here for.
Sweet. Mike, I'm curious because you said you were a Christian of kind of neither young nor old variety, but then decided young Earth creationism was correct. What about young Earth creationism kind of took you that direction, since you already had the faith of God beforehand? So faith can't be the only reason why young Earth creationism would be convincing to you, because you already had that faith to begin with. So outside of
that, what brought me to young Earth creationist viewpoint is, I mean, to me, what's the easy definition of science? It's something you can observe, demonstrate, and repeat, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
Science basically looks for a natural explanation to a natural phenomenon. It makes predictions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, to me, it's all faith. Like, I know you guys will highly disagree with me on this, but I mean, I start with God and build my theology off of God.
But how would you make a prediction based upon that? I mean, if I wanted to if I hit a billiard ball and I want to project where those balls go, I don't have to have any knowledge of God's existence or not. I get to use physics for that.
Right, but I would have to argue that you would have to use God's principles to even make a prediction on that.
But I don't. I just have to use physics.
Okay, well, let's say we accept that. Let's say we accept you build. I mean, it makes sense to have your God and build your theology off of that. But if you are saying that, okay, so I was building my faith, I started with my faith in God, and I was led to young Earth creationism starting from that point. So what made you choose young Earth creationism versus old Earth creationism? Because there are plenty of very religious scientists and very religious people who do not buy into young Earth creationism. Right. So what
Okay, right. And I don't disagree with them at all. I mean, like I said, I think it's great. But honestly, like I told you, I started out as an old Earth creationist. Honestly, I mean, so I just being straight up honest. Mm-hmm. I started studying material by Jonathan Savarte, Andrew Snelling, Andrews and Genesis, and those things clicked with me. You know what I mean? So then it got me thinking about what Christ said about in the beginning. So where is Christ put in the beginning at, is my question. What I'm deriving everything else from. When Jesus said in the beginning, what's he mean by that?
I'll probably have Safardi on one of these days too. He'll come on.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to him. So I really am not a fan of his abortion fear mongering. I'm not a fan. Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, it seems to me that you took in teachings from people like Ken Ham, and those resonated with you because you understood what he was saying. You understood what he was presenting and putting forth. Is that about right?
Just not Ken Hovind.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
I think we all agree about not Ken Hovind.
There's more than one, quote, list of arguments that creationists shouldn't use. That's just a list of arguments that Kent Hovind still uses.
Yeah, CMI actually has a list.
He is the list.
Yeah, even CMI says, okay, these are really bad arguments. And they do add to them, Which I'll give them props for that, but it's still they still have so many bad arguments, and they don't.
Well, the question is was it more the argumentation, or was it more the facts that they were presenting?
I think it was
because
more.
Those are very different things, because the way something is presented can make something sound very reasonable or sound very convincing versus like something that is actually just a fact that has been misrepresented or wrong. For example, talking about AIG, the first thing off the top of my head is the blood vessels in dinosaurs. Just like that nonsense.
Mary Schweitzer's work. Yeah, I think that
poor woman.
I think that what happened was some of those arguments that are on CMI, they just got to be so unwieldy and untenable for even them to even try to like back them up. I mean, there's some arguments that are just prima facie, just bad. I mean, look at like the lanolin one. That the lanolin is supposed to be in like the shape of a T, which is a cross, which is Christian and God. And it's like, okay, you've had such jumps in reason there. It's unbelievable. And so I think
it's also not actually in the shape of a cross.
Right? No, I agree with that.
The real molecule.
Yeah,
it's just diagrams are easy to draw in that shape.
Right. It's exactly. And so I mean, if that's the best evidence you've got of God, that's a problem. That's horrible evidence.
I would be one not to. I would suggest that any Christian would not use that argument.
Well, they do too, right? But you still have Christians that use that argument. But even CMI basically have said that's a bad argument.
Yeah.
But even with the arguments they do purport, like Dr. Tompkins still has never addressed to this day how there is spurious transmissions on the DDX11L2 gene that he thinks is highly expressed. But when you ask him for the data, there's none to be had. And that's that's very telling when you ask for data, because everybody should be able to go verify this. Any biologist should be able to go to Ensemble or whatever gene sequencing site that has how much reads there are per gene, and see what the read is on it. And there's just none. It's spurious transmissions. It's a gene that doesn't even have a promoter region. And so Tompkins' work is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. But he won't address it. Same thing with Humphreys. Humphreys had a basic math error, and it took Dr. Lachelle writing a paper to a Christian publication to show that he had a simple math error.
And it's not like science doesn't have stuff like that happens too. It's certainly not exclusive to religion. There are times when science gets something wrong. It takes a long ass time to get that shit fixed.
Right, but science will update it. They don't. They still, even after they've been shown to be wrong, that Humphrey's work is still up there, even though it has glaring math error. It's still there. They don't revise it or take it down, because it would show that all that work on helium diffusion rates they did was wrong. All the rates project stuff they did was wrong. The younger creationists got it all wrong.
Yeah, and
are you referring to the rate team?
Yeah, I've helped facilitate Humphrey and Dr. Lachelle and Dr. Hinkie on some of the rate stuff and some of the helium diffusion rates. Matter of fact, if you go read the webpage of Dr. Hinkie, Henke, he did a updated version from Talk Origins on his paper on helium diffusion rates, and he must have mentioned me like 50 times because we have spent like 8 hours of in-depth on that subject. And I think Humphreys has recognized maybe now that he was wrong, but he still can't fully admit it.
That's why I was kind of curious about Mike's experience, because if you found AIG convincing, was it the facts that they were presenting that was convincing, or was it the argumentation or the presentation that you found convincing? Because there's just some things that AIG is just there's wrong.
And it's wrong.
You don't seem like the kind of person that wants to just have wrong facts informing their decision.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I don't. And and that's why I said, when I hold the young Earth, I'm not opposed to, because the Bible doesn't say, hey, the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and it doesn't say it's 1 trillion years old. So I think it's kind of,
so why not let science mandate and kind of say, oh, look, all these dozens and dozens and dozens of different disciplines all show the Earth to be a consilience of 4.5 billion years. There's just no outliers. There's not a single outlier or single discipline that has any statistical variance outside what we would expect for the age of the Earth. Anywhere you point, you pick biology, geology, archaeology, proteomics, anything you pick, it's all going to be exactly the same what we expect. And I think that when you have a source that you're reading and saying, oh, well, I'm going to read into this as, it's a young Earth, when all the evidence goes against it, that isn't a God that I would probably want to worship, because I would think that God would want me to go, okay, let's look at what we can explore. Let's look at what we can figure out. I have the tools to do these things. I have the formulas. I have the knowledge to do these things. So let's do it. And for then God to come around and say, well, yeah, all that stuff's wrong. That's just not a God I would believe in personally.
I would agree with you on that issue. Whoever's doing science, okay, if their theory is false, okay, and they know it's false, they should scrap it.
I agree.
Well,
yeah.
Can I point out that is some of the people that you named as your kind of influences in going from sort of ambiguous on your belief about the age of the Earth,
especially Snelling.
Young. Yeah, actually, that's who I was going to bring up. So Snelling simply lies. For instance, when he does things like, he'll say that, well, when I went to the Coconino Sandstone and measured the angle of the cross-bedding to determine if this sandstone was marine or a desert deposition, he just gave numbers that no one else can find. And he also has done things like taken pictures of various rock formations while putting people in front of parts of them that he doesn't want you to see.
Yeah, I think Snelling is absolutely dishonest. I think he is 100% one of the most dishonest creationists out there.
He also was banned from doing further work in the Grand Canyon because he wasn't taking proper controls. And then he claimed it was because of persecution. And in order to avoid a lengthy lawsuit, he was given permission to work again. But he absolutely lied about why he was banned.
Yeah, I remember that, actually, because he was given permission on first time. And then the second time he wasn't, then he decided to say that was some kind of relating to persecution of religion, and it's like, no, it had to do with science. And he wasn't abiding by the controls that they gave to everybody. And also,
which he said he would in order to get that permission.
But he didn't.
So he lied to the park services, basically.
Yeah.
So he lied to do his initial work. He lied about the work. He lied about why he was banned from doing further work.
And they told him they weren't going to give him another one.
So some of your sources are concerning to me. Also, I happen to know that I can't say for certain whether or not Jonathan Sarfati is lying, but I can tell you at least this. I've heard him talk about bird anatomy, and he gets very, very basic facts about the anatomy of birds extremely wrong. And my only conclusions are that he's just never looked into the anatomy of birds, but decided to speak about it with some authority, or he did realize it didn't help him and decided to.
Yeah, I can say from Sarfati, because I've known him for so long. I mean, we used to go back 6 years. And
Steve likes Sarfati way more than I do.
No, it's not. It's not
Steve
that.
Has
it's not that. It's just
bad way of judging people based on how long he knows.
But I think I can make this statement. I think that Sarfati is a true blue believer, right? Snelling, I can't say that with, because he's just so dishonest. I mean, when you have people that are dishonest to that degree, it's hard for me to even believe that they believe what they claim to believe. But I think Sarfati is a true blue believer. Does he have possible, cognitive dissonance? Possible.
I'm open to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but he's, and a lot of people don't like him. I get that. He could be a real, asshole to people, but he's never been that way to me, and that's just how I judge him. And I don't see any reason to be an asshole to him, right? So. Do I think he does those things on purpose with the birds? Probably not.
He doesn't raise my hackles the way some others do. Like
Hovind.
There are certainly. Listen,
we all dislike Hovind. Yeah. Everyone here isn't a fan of Hovind, so we don't have to.
But my intuition, I'll call it, to be nice about it. At least calling it my intuition makes it a little less damning to some people, because it's not really just based on how I feel about something. But he does not raise my hackles the same way like Dr. Purdom does, or like the same way maybe Hovind or Matt Powell does, or like maybe Randolph Richardson does, like people that are part of, or Matt Dillahunty does. They like these are people that like they say something or they do something and I'm like, I'm not a fan of John's stuff about abortion, like which is I'm not a fan of fear mongering in general, though, but it doesn't make. I think he's doing that earnestly. I don't think he's doing it manipulatively.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
I
Gary,
won't dispute it.
Gary.
Yeah, I think
I necessarily agree. I just won't dispute.
And Humphreys, I said, Humphreys, I absolutely believe is a true believer as well.
I should say yet. He hasn't raised my hackles yet, but I haven't been in a this kind of a conversation with him yet, so that could change, I guess.
He hasn't pretended you were a perfectly innocent third party yet, like he did with me.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah.
do you know Dapper Kent pretended he didn't know me? And people were like, "Oh, shut up, Kent. You know Steve. Just come on."
That was fun.
Yeah. Right.
So I guess what I'm getting at is the names that you gave raised some concerns for me, because some of the people I know to have made very elementary mistakes in terms of the basic science, and others of them, especially Snelling, I have lost the ability to come to any conclusion other than that they are just being dishonest. Because, for instance, look, when you measure an angle, you just hold out the protractor, right? You can't really get that wrong unless you're either incompetent, which we know he's not, because he's a published geologist who has published like real papers and textbooks in just mainstream scientific publications. So we know he's competent. So he's just lying about what his protractor is showing him. Or I believe it was Snelling who also said that the supposed raindrops that are known from the Coconino sandstone were not really raindrops. And then it was pointed out to him, well, yeah, the things that you're writing about are scorpion tracks, not raindrops. That's why they don't look like raindrops. Look, here's the drag mark for the tail. Like, that's the kind of thing that passes for science at places like Creation Ministries International or Answers in Genesis. Or you have, like Chesh mentioned, Georgia Purdom just gleefully stating in an Answers News episode that humans don't have vitellogenin pseudogenes when they absolutely do. It doesn't matter terribly much what that is, but the point is that that's just it's either a statement of profound ignorance that you have no right to say, or it's a lie.
If I'm not mistaken, she doesn't believe there's anything. She doesn't believe any gene is a pseudogene or something like that. Fact,
which is just
she thinks that. It's all in the ENCODE thing, right? Because the ENCODE project basically said, there's so less functional genes that we thought, but they're still non-functional. They just have some kind of conformational changes. They have something of activity that they detected, but that doesn't mean there's a read on it. And so when we're talking about pseudogenes, they're still pseudogenes. They're inactive. They don't code for protein.
Are you referring to junk DNA?
Yeah. Well, there's junk and garbage DNA, and so the way the ENCODE project define junk DNA, it basically just changed the bar. That's all. Nothing. Yeah. There's no data difference. It's just that they said, okay, anything that has any kind of activity we can detect, we're not going to put it as a pseudogene, even though it doesn't transcribe for any kind of protein. So it was really a silly way to do it. I haven't met a biologist yet that thought that made sense.
Most of the authors on their initial publication have since gone back and retracted that number as their position.
That would be wise to do so, because it really it had no reason to do that. There's a reason why they had said these genes are junk, because they don't code for protein. Why do we care that they have any kind of spurious or conformational changes? It just makes no sense. So it doesn't help the creationists at all, because all it was merely defining what we consider to be junk DNA. We didn't find any more or less than what was before.
My favorite thing there was that they counted being targeted for methylation as activity, when being targeted for methylation makes it harder for the cell to use that part of the chromosome in the first place. Actually,
if it's methylated, it's going to be less chance of being transcribed.
Right. So it's literally like, hey, the genome is trying to deactivate this, so we're going to call it functional. And it's like,
yeah, I mean, if
I
you
feel like that's weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you've got these histone modifications where you have the DNA so tightly wound on it, you're not going to get transcribed. If you're going to have methylation on the DNA backbone, you're going to have less transcriptions. And so, I don't know why they would call that as something that isn't junk. You're not being transcribed if it's methylated. And by the way, we have CRISPR-Cas9 out there. He knows all about this stuff, so he'll correct us. He says lots of things that don't code for protein are still important and functional. Yeah, sure. You have obviously transfer RNAs and messenger RNA and regulating RNA. Sure. For instance, a code categorized functional is vaguely near something transcribed at least once. Yeah. I think obviously CRISPR-Cas9 knows his stuff, and he's absolutely right. That's not saying that these are not important. I'm not saying that a pseudogene might not have a different purpose, right? I mean.
Well, I think that this is why this question is important, because Mike does not seem like the kind of person who wants to either A, be misled, or B, have just information that is incorrect or maybe very close to correct, but not quite due to its presentation, particularly when you get like a group like AIG. So that's why I'm curious. Since Mike has already changed positions from more of an old Earth to a young Earth, and the convincing factors, for all we know, because we haven't gotten there yet, is the convincing factor might be information that was just presented incorrectly.
Yeah.
Or it might be information that was presented in a way Mike was able to grasp and understand and apply. And that's very, very important, because that can be, whether the information is correct or not, the way you present something to help educate people can be incredibly goddamn important, because you can be all the right in the world, but if you're an asshole, nobody's gonna care.
Yeah, Mike doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's such a vested interest that he has to lie for his beliefs. I don't detect any of that whatsoever.
No. That's not
No, nor would I ever. If I have a theory and it's point out it's wrong, okay, scrap it. You get a new one. But people should not lie or mislead people, especially people who want to learn.
Yeah.
Right, I agree. But what is that? So I know that this is probably not a time where you can go and check on everything that we're saying, and perhaps you'll do that afterwards. But
don't take us by fiat.
Right. But let's say that what I'm reporting to you say about Andrew Snelling, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's not an isolated incident. It's just that he's a particularly egregious example. That kind of behavior permeates young Earth creationism generally. There's either a lack of attention to the actual science being done, or hard to dismiss dishonesty, or both. If you, on your investigation, found that to be true, would that make you reconsider your position on things like the age of the Earth or universal common ancestry?
Well, like I said, I'm always going to believe in God as my foundation. But as what you're saying is, if I would find Andrew Snelling just his work not honest, I would certainly look at him and say, I'm probably not going to want to read or research his work no more.
That's what I would recommend. I mean, I think one of the most ridiculous things that Snelling ever did was he tried to pass off pyroclastic flow formations as sedimentary layers, and saying, "Oh, look, these things filled. These things became, over 2 weeks, and therefore that's the Grand Canyon was, rapid." Completely different processes, completely different materials, and he is a geologist. He knows this. That was absolutely morbidly, I think, dishonest.
Yeah, he also frequently pretends that formations that are in fact subaerial are submarine, because he thinks they all formed under a flood, even though
we know that they haven't.
For instance, we know how to tell if a volcanic flow happened underwater or under the air.
It's a different structure.
Yeah, and he'll look at a subaerial volcanic flow, like a pyroclastic flow or a tuff or something, and he'll just say, "Oh no, this is submarine," and it's like you can't just say that. We know for a fact that this isn't what happens when these things. Yeah,
because he's convinced that there was such a great flood and that everything was underwater at one time, but we know that clearly wasn't the case.
There's certainly the most ridiculous thing I find is when groups like AIG present young Earth creationism as if young Earth creationism being wrong should shake your faith in God in any way. It should not. It shouldn't. The Earth being young or old should have very little effect or pressure upon your belief in God, because one is a discussion about philosophy and your belief system and your faith, and the other one is just shit that's wrong about science.
Yeah, but could you make the argument though that because, for example, like okay, my personal obviously beliefs, I think that every young Earth creationist is wrong, right? I mean, clearly, but that doesn't mean all of them are dishonest. But you have a lot of them who are dishonest. A lot of Christians who are dishonest. You have a lot of atheists who are dishonest.
This is why I focus on groups rather than individuals. So there are certainly individuals that are dishonest, like smelling, like you've been saying. And then there are people that are individuals who have put their faith and their trust into these groups because they're a religious organization. So they're like, well, this Christian, it's wrong for Christians to lie. It's in the doctrine that it's wrong for them to lie. They aren't going to be lying to me. Right? And so you've taken advantage of people's faith at that point, in my opinion. And as the same thing goes to atheist groups. They take advantage of people who were dogmatic, and instead of helping them get out of dogmatic thinking, they just take advantage of it and point it in a different fucking direction, which is awful and, in my opinion, in some cases predatory, which is why I focus on talking about AIG, the group, being problematic as an organization rather than picking on necessarily Ken Ham in particular, although you could pick on Ken Ham in particular if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
I don't, because I'm still convinced he's a werewolf, and I don't want to pick on werewolves because that sounds dangerous.
There's certainly a minority that sounds racist.
I think my point is just that, I see so many religious organizations.
I don't actually think that.
Causing these types of harm that I wonder if it should it even have any evaluatory properties that you can put towards a god and say, okay, because all these people are so dishonest, does it lower the likelihood of God existing? Now, of course, you can make the same argument. Well, atheists lie. Does that make it more likely that God does not exist? Maybe, I guess. I don't know.
The answer is that people being shitty doesn't dictate God existing or not. Like, people are going to be garbage people. And people, if you want to take the route of religion, particularly Christianity, humans sin. Humans are going to sin. And there's people that are false prophets that are going to try to take advantage of good Christian people. And that's trashy, and they shouldn't do that. But it becomes really difficult to deal with when they've taken advantage of so many good Christian people that those good Christian people are now backing and standing up for people who are fucking lying to them.
Because they believe them, right? And if they believe them, though, doesn't it?
Well, and then suddenly we're the bad guys for being like, hold up, wait, no, that's not right.
I think that people, when they had enough, if they've been lied to enough by a particular religion, they go, okay, maybe all of religion is nonsense. No, that doesn't happen like all the time. And I'm wondering if it's even just, something to be justified, saying, hey, look, I was a member of this particular church. They were wrong. Therefore, I'm just going to believe that there are no gods.
It comes off as knee-jerky to me to say that, oh, no God exists now because this one group of people was addicted.
It just means you just found the wrong, you didn't find the answers you were looking for.
But it's also like as a step in another direction. Sure, I would certainly, if you feel like you've been lied to a bunch by a group of people, why would you trust people who tout or purport to be of that same group, right?
I don't think I wouldn't say that God's existence doesn't depend upon humans being here. Number one.
Well, if God existed, it wouldn't. Yeah,
I would agree with that.
And one thing I do find common with young Earth, not all of them, but almost some young Earth will betray. Like, if you don't believe in a young Earth, then you can't be saved. Now, I'm not saying all of them are like that, but that is not a good thing to be.
Yeah, I mean, because that would be relating a salvational issue to something that to me would be so menial in God's eyes, that if God said, oh, look, you didn't believe the earth was 6,000 years old and you're going to hell, that God is petty.
Yeah, I would agree.
Why would I believe that God when I can see what I know about the sciences that supposedly he created as well gives a completely different position.
I actually think that that's even common among young Earth creationists. That actual attitude is common in young Earth creationists who say it's not their position. So, for instance, like if you look at AIG, they'll say that it's not a salvation issue to believe in, a young Earth and to disregard evolution. But if you look at all their material, virtually none of it is designed to convince, say, people like me or Chesh or Steve of young Earth creationism. It's almost all designed to keep young Earth creationist Christians inside the fold, and a little bit of it is aimed at taking Christians who aren't young Earth creationists and trying to make them young Earth creationists.
1000% believe that, yes.
So even
it's
there,
an evangelicalism style.
Yeah, because we can read their stuff and go, okay, this is completely wrong. We know this is wrong. This is scientifically inaccurate. I see it all the time.
I don't know if I've ever read a CMI or AIG article that didn't get fundamental, like, first year of college level things about science wrong.
Every one of them I found something. I mean, I remember reading one, and I think it was Sarfati's article, actually. But it had talk about gibbons, and gibbons are lesser apes, so they can have all kinds of diploid number. Ours are obviously 46. Gibbons.
Oh, okay. They can have
40, 44, 46.
Different, right. I thought you were about to say that he said that they had different ploidy numbers.
No. And so they were talking about apes that, since we have 46 and other great apes have 48, and there's a species that he mentioned in there that said, oh, well, this one only has 44, but it wasn't a great ape. It was actually a lesser ape. It was a type of gibbon, if you look it up. And I'm like, well, that's a completely different argument. I mean, we're not. Nobody argued that we're somehow like we're on the same branches as the lesser apes. We're on the same.
Well, no one argues that anymore, Steve.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. But I mean, why would you dishonestly go, oh, look, here's a great ape with 44 diploid number when it wasn't a great ape when you look it up? That seems odd. Because it was against the human chromosome number 2 fusion site. Why would you? Let me ask Dapper real quick. Why would you ever?
Steve's on a thing.
Yeah. Why would you ever? If you want to argue against the human chromosome 2 fusion site, why would you ever employ lesser apes? Hypolatade, or whatever you pronounce it. Why would you even use it? It had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, especially not to point out that I think I might have dropped.
No,
you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
We're here.
Well, it's just I can't see anyone's video, so I thought maybe I dropped. Anyway, so especially not if the lesser ape in question, and I'm trying not to use all the scientific names, has a lower chromosome count than standard for great apes. Because if anything, that's just like more confirmation that yes, chromosomes confuse in
absolutely, but it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the fusion site. And that to me I thought was dishonest.
It's double wrong.
Yeah, it's double wrong. They never corrected it though. I pointed out to Safadi ages ago.
Actually, in terms of corrections, that reminds me. So you talk about Jeffrey Tompkins' work that is incorrect about human and chimp genetic similarity. There's, as far as I know, to this day, a paper that is on his desk that was submitted to the research journal that CMI runs, which the name escapes me at the moment, that has yet to be published, which critiques his use of BLAST, which is the program he used to compare the genomes. And it has not currently passed through peer review, although as far as I know, it hasn't officially been rejected. But literally the only peer reviewer is, in fact, Tompkins.
Well, I mean, how many times
also apparently their editor?
Well, the problem is how many times did he? And I'm sorry, Mike, we got on a tangent here, but how many times did he tried to use the BLAST program, and then he used the gap parameter to try to include indels. Instead of having it one event, it would have like all the nucleotide changes in those indels, which is not how you would read it. He came up with 70%, and then they find out that there's a bug in BLAST that was discovered. So his findings were completely wrong, and yet people still quote that number out there. Oh, we're only 70%,
even after he had the bug BLAST points out, which to his credit, he did correct.
He did correct that, and that paper was rescinded.
Yeah, he did retract that, and he did then go get a version of BLAST which did not have that bug. But then his subsequent paper had methodologents problems.
Yeah, he tried running the ungap parameter to try to fudge his numbers. Right. Yeah, that's. Well,
he also had trouble with aligning segments, right? So normally when you do a DNA comparison, you try to look for bits that you can line up reasonably well to see where the differences are. Because, like, where do you start? Well, you start by doing sequence alignment. and his sequent alignments methods were just garbage. So unsurprisingly, he got a number that no one else gets when they use.
Yeah, because
what is
again,
generally
he's not
considered
doing
proper
science. He's
methods.
doing confirmation bias. He's looking to find. So the difference between creation science is that I've noticed that they're trying to find evidence that supports their belief rather than not just look at the evidence, see where it leads to.
That's the fundamental difference I think a lot of us would have with Mike is I am starting from this foundation of God and then I move forward, which the way a lot of science works is you can't make that God assumption. So no matter how much faith you have, God exists at the beginning is an assumption that you have to make. And if you want to make that assumption, okay, you have to make assumptions, but you have to acknowledge that is what you're doing.
And the fact remains is whether you assume God exists or doesn't exist, the formulas work. You can still do an experiment whether you believe in God or not. And so
you shouldn't.
You don't have to make that assumption.
If God is true and God is real, you should not have to fudge any of your numbers in science to show that God is true or real, which is what you see from things like AIG.
Matter of fact, if you really wanted
I have
to,
more of a problem with young Earth creationism than I do with people. Like, I don't think anybody in this call right now, and Steve and Dapper, is none of us are going to try to convince you your God doesn't exist.
No, we're not interested in that.
But all of us would feel much better if you decided to think that young Earth creationism is not necessarily the right way to go about the God thing.
Yeah, generally speaking, if someone's a theistic evolutionist who is, in accord with the science on things like the age of the Earth and the universe, that's where I stop having any disagreements that I care to actually
I'm
address.
the same way. At that point, it's whatever. Kawasa of 10,001. Here's my fraudulent super chat. Thank you, Kawasa. Appreciate it, man.
We better call the RCMP because now Chesh is perpetuating fraud.
Cheshire has to do a follow up on that. If you want to throw that out real quick, because
remember the FBI is still looking for Chesh. Because
that's true.
The FBI looks for Canadians in Canada. That's a totally thing. Sorry, Mike. This is completely off topic.
What did I do this time?
No, I was talking about the Randolph Richardson trying to pretend he was, some kind of.
So if it makes Mike feel any better, I don't just shit on things like AIG. I will also absolutely take a complete dump on Canadian atheists.
Spend more time complaining about stupid atheists than you do about young Earth creation.
I brainwashed Cheshire. I mean, it's like people were like 5 years ago, like, "Oh, Steve's so wrong," and then I, get people realizing, no, Steve actually makes some pretty solid arguments, and Steve does know a little about this topic. And Cheshire learned all that stuff, and she took it, and she's like, "Yeah, goddamn, these atheists are stupid. Fuck, Steve was right."
I am convinced that this guy is scamming people. He's presenting himself as if he's an activist group, and I say he because he's one guy running this thing. I couldn't find any source whatsoever indicating that it was more than one person as a corporation taking donations, pretending he's being an activist for Canadian atheists while doing none of those things.
Yep.
So I don't know what to call that besides a scam in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think it is to point out that this is not a group where it's just we've got to get one on the Christians. As far as I know, no one here is interested in dunking on Christians for being Christians.
No.
If we have a disagreement that we want to hash out, it's going to be something much more solid and I think much more significant than just whether or not you believe in, say, the salvation by Christ. That's, as far as Dapper Dino is concerned, I just don't. It's not an issue I want to hash out. I can't say I don't care because I do have personal feelings, but it's not something I'm going to talk about on the internet with people in a setting like this. So,
I think it's a great thing that we can get together like this and be civil. What's your guys' intake on the laws of logic?
I have a whole blog on it that I wrote explaining the laws of logic as the principles of logic. What's your question? You can go read my blog. I go into great detail of how to derive the laws of logic. Except for law of identity is not derivable. But what do you mean by what do I think of them? They're principles of logic that we use for conditions of rationality that are just axiomatic assumptions.
So they're like more or less conventions and ends in your view?
They're conventions, yeah. I mean, classical logic isn't the only type of logic. I mean, there are logics out there that don't use the principles of logic.
Are we going down Psi 10 route of
I told you I'm a Banson fan. I'm a Greg Banson fan, so you mean. So anyone who knows Greg Banson knows why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, he's a presuppositionalist that thinks the laws of logic has to exist in all times and all places, and that because they're conceptualized, they have to exist some mind that exists forever, and that mind would be God. It doesn't quite work that way, but that's how Bonson, I think, would idealize the laws of logic, saying that they have to exist in the mind of God. But also, Greg Bonson was also the same one that said the only reason his type of presuppositionalism was to shut the mouth of the unbeliever. So he realized that all he was trying to do was obfuscate. All he was trying to do was be a contrarian. Presupposition apologetics was strong years ago when it first came out of the gate. Then people like Floyd F.P., people like myself, people like Bert Pohl and Ozymandias, Ramses II, all helped explain to people, look, this is just smoke and mirrors. There's nothing that the presuppositionist has that an atheist has as far as justifications or answers. It's basically
it's a matter of contrarianism.
Yeah, it's not even an argument. Presuppositionism is not an argument. Even Bonson agrees with that.
How do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that? Ad absurdum until you get to, well, it has to be God. And it's like, well, hold on. You can ask, how do you know that, as many times as you want. It doesn't reach the conclusion of God until you can say, but why is it God then?
Well, the first question you ask somebody, like I ask Cy all the time, like when you say, how do you know that? I'm like, well, which theory of knowledge do you use? He knows what theory of knowledge is. He knows what justified true belief is. I mean, you have to start there. Do you start with Methodism or you start with particularism? What you start with what you know, and then do you go to how you know it, or you start with how you know something and then figure out what you know? There are very, very specific methodological approaches to acquiring knowledge. So when people say, well, how do you know that? Well, okay, let's look at the theory of knowledge that I used. Do I meet the criteria for those theories of knowledge? Yes. If it's true and I believe it and it's justified, I can claim it's knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't need it. And God's not a condition for that.
You start getting into conversations or questions about, well, somebody will say, well, okay, well, what do you define what is true, right? And then it's like, well, are you talking about from an existential point of view? How do you know you open the door to your house and it's going to lead into your house? I
just say something that's true if it has some kind of corresponding fact to it, or it has a truth maker or truth condition.
To follow up on that, can universal negative be absolutely proven?
You can do what's called a proof by impossibility. Like you can prove a square circle, does not exist, or you can't square the circles with a compass. That has been proven, right? So you can do proof by possibilities that certain things are not possible. When it comes to existential questions, yeah, it depends. Like I said, I think you could. So if you knew about math, geometry, I couldn't do this, but I mean, somebody who knows about math could probably pretty quickly prove that you cannot have a square circle. Right. I mean, even we understand intuitively that a square circle is a contradiction. So obviously, there's a way of proving that.
Can you not mathematically prove that there's an infinite number between number 1 and number 2?
You can prove there's an infinite number of real numbers between any two finite numbers.
Yeah, and so you can also prove that the Earth is not flat.
Well, that's through evidence, right? A mathematical proof is a little different from evidential proof.
Mathematical proof is different, but what I'm giving examples of different things in different fields that would apply differently. So if you're going to talk about something that is a universal negative, well, depending on what field you're working in is going to change the kind of answer you're going to get. So in physics, you're going to get there's going to be proofs, there's going to be evidences, and in mathematics, there's going to be proofs of a different kind. I mean, it is what it is, but they're not the same kind of discussion.
Well, they're also though, it's a simple thing. Like if I say true equals false, that's a negative, right? I mean, that's a false statement. That's a universal negative.
Yeah,
because
you've also got problems.
It's a contradiction.
You start having a dichotomy and a proper dichotomy and saying, well, the answer is either true or false, but that doesn't mean that your positions on that proposition being true or false or not has to either be true or false.
And that's where a lot of atheists get confused. Yeah.
Right.
And that's the biggest hang up too. They don't realize that even though if the proposition, because of the laws of logic, have to be true or false, doesn't mean that you have to accept a proposition as true or false. You can have no position either way on it. And in theory, you could believe it's true and false if you want some kind of, paraconsistent, type of logic, or you just have a rational thinking. I mean, in theory, you could have an irrational thought where you believe something's true or false at the same time, but that's more of an epistemic thing due to beliefs. But as far as a proposition, it is a contradiction for a proposition to be both true and false at the same time in classical.
So I think we actually just answered your question with yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's how I look at the laws of logic. I mean, we are familiar with these topics.
Sorry, we got like...
I mean,
it's more of a sometimes than just a blanket yes.
Yeah. I mean, would you agree that laws of logic are just descriptive things that we use in logic, because it just adds it is what we see as far as like law of identity. An apple's an apple. We observe this, so we can say any object in itself. It's just an axiom that seems to be from observations.
It is an apple whether you decide to identify or observe it or not. Yeah. Right?
Now, you don't have to observe it. Those are actually a priori. A equals A, or all of x equals x is actually an a priori analytical statement. You don't have to observe it to be a posteriori, though you can, but
F in the chat for me, by the way. I said evidences. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, some people get pissed off when you pluralize
F
evidences.
in the chat. I messed it up.
Just evidence.
Why do people get mad?
Because they're
standard like academic English, the word evidence is what's called a non-count noun. So you're not supposed to use like plurals with it. You can use counting words, like you could say pieces of evidence. But here's the thing, right? Steve and I are both descriptivists, and it's just like, if you're in a group that habitually uses evidence as a count noun, then that's great. And here's the thing: Christian theological writing is an area where in English the word evidence is an account noun. So
yeah, I don't particularly have a problem with that.
Dapper's defending me. Thanks, Dapper.
White knight.
Well, it does show that you're actually a secret Christian apologist.
Well, shit, I'm busted.
Yep, you're just infiltrating all of these non-Christian spaces in order to, I don't know.
Yeah, I have to go out of my way to undermine Randolph Richardson's powerhouse of an atheist group.
So yeah, I am going to defend the Christian apologetics and theological writers, because they're in a group where that is the standard use of the word. It's not wrong. It's just non-standard in most other circles. So
I don't like evidences so much as I don't like evolutionists. Evolutionists is kind of like a little bit of a for me.
That one gets me because it's basically no one self-identifying label. So the idea that you're going to call people that is a little weird to me.
Well, yeah, because it tends to be looked down upon derogatory, like, oh yeah, you're an evolutionist. It's like, okay,
it's
so yeah, whatever.
They're trying to use it as a slur.
Yeah.
No, so I wouldn't probably call one like an evolutionist, because even the creationists as me, I believe in evolution.
Well, they do accept. Well, see, here's the thing though, with Badder MOAB and Young Earth Creationism, they eventually had no choice but to recognize there were some forms of evolution. Their models wouldn't even work without evolution. That's what I think is the most funniest thing, is they're taking bits and pieces from evolutionary theory merely to save their own theory that doesn't work, but it has to have certain things to even work, and one of which would be evolution. It just cannot work without it.
Right. I'm no scientist, but like I said, growing up, I was a country boy, and I'd hunt deer, all kinds of deer, different types of animals. And for me to look at a white-tailed deer and look at a mule deer, I see a lot of resemblance with each other there. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, but those are phenotypical.
That I learned about deer is that they're closely related to like whales and shit, and I was like, "Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me with this nonsense!" Come on.
I mean, things can look very similar too phenotypically, but be vastly different genetically. But the thing is that we exist, and the wonderful thing that evolution explained to us is that, why do we see so much biodiversification? Oh, it's because things are constantly bifurcating. Species are constantly proliferating and evolving because of selective pressures. They're changing under selective pressures. We know this, so this explains why certain creatures have certain phenotypes in certain conditions that are better equipped for those environments. Why is that? It wasn't because of some like magical reason. It had to do with the fact that this propagated because it was better suited for their environment, and therefore it produced more offspring that survived. That's it. I mean, it's just basically reproductive, differential reproduction for natural selection. So we know for the evolutionary theory that has to exist, even if you want to explain biodiversification from 7,000 years ago. There has to be that type of change. There, right?
Right. I mean, I don't know any creation. I guess there would be some. I guess you could probably want to find someone somewhere about that. But you mean that has never been my position. That you'd have to have a lot of that going on. Natural selection, variation.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, it just, I don't know. For a creationist not to take that point, I wouldn't agree with him on that too much.
Well, they used to. 50 years ago, most creationists out there would probably be very, very anti any form of evolution. They would have been against natural selection, probably.
That is true. There was the earliest, I suppose, stratum of creationism was very early, and it was actually before Charles Darwin. But it was very much convinced of the fixity of species. So they believe that the species that are around today were directly created by God, and also many of them believe that they were the only species that had ever been created, and that if these species would die out, God would simply recreate a population of them. And so they also thought that extinction was generally impossible. And that was the mainstream view for a lot of people for quite a while, until paleontology started to really become a thing, and then people realized, oh, that's not tenable. We definitely can't keep believing that one.
Yeah, but even still, they hold on to things that are still untenable. So they kind of pick and choose what. I mean, that one obviously it fundamentally wouldn't work. And so I think a lot of these things that are fundamentally broken over time are going to go more away. I think creationism is dying down. I really do. I see far less of it than I did 5 years ago. And
it's declining in the United
States. Young Earth creationism or creationism in general?
Young Earth.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I'm not sure about that. There's a lot of creationism.
I'm not talking about
older. If you mean just the plain belief that some deity is responsible for creating the universe, I don't know that that's on the decline. What I mean is the versions that specifically take certain aspects of science and
we can show science is wrong.
True.
Right. And
right.
Mike, let me ask you this.
Time together.
Do you agree, though, that science as a whole, I mean, I believe it's conclusive, obviously, but I want to pick my words here. Do you believe that science at least has, to what it thinks, demonstrated very effectively that the Earth is not 6,000 years old? Do you think that science? Do you agree that science would go against young creationism, or do you think that science actually shows that the Earth is 6,000 years old?
So you're asking me pretty much, does science show that the creation of the universe will be older than 6,000 years old?
I mean, as far as academic science, if you were to read the peer review paper,
I wouldn't argue with you about it. Like I said, I don't really hold any true position of the age of the Earth.
So why don't you do this then? If you say that you just had no idea the age of the Earth, you have no idea. You say, okay, God exists. That's all I know. I'm going to start with that premise. Okay, I'll grant you that. But then go, okay, knowing God exists. Okay, now how do I go about finding out the age of the Earth? Oh, let me go read some things, right? And when you read the scientific literature, it'll explain in great detail with evidence. When you read the creationism material, it doesn't explain anything, and it doesn't have any evidence. It's wrong. It just fundamentally has basic facts about science and things that we know, math that we know, that's just wrong. The math doesn't work either.
Yeah,
well, that was why I was kind of asking, right, about what was it that was convincing to you? Was it the facts, or was it the argumentation in the presentation? Because the argumentation in the presentation, they're just different things. They're just different.
Well, someone could present facts in the wrong way, be highly effective, and have the wrong outcome. Very wrong.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
Nobody would disagree with that.
You can be good at rhetoric and wrong on the facts and still be convincing, because that's all that rhetoric is.
I mean, look at William Lane Craig. I think he is very, very good at debating. Do I think he gets some stuff wrong? Yeah. Plantinga. you know, great at certain philosophies. Do I think his theodicies are bunk? Yeah. Do I think his modal arguments flawed? Yeah. Do I think his whole reformed epistemology is foobar? Yeah. But he's considered to be a great philosopher, I guess. There's some writings he has that are, amazing. So that I've read that I do agree with him on.
My question to Mike would be, let's say that you did an investigation into, say, the sources that AIG uses, and you check them against some other, say some mainstream literature to see why it is that the main body of science does not come to the same conclusions, and in fact often comes to extremely different conclusions. At some point, if that got you away from, say, the young Earth and even anti-evolutionism, so that you were accepting that, say humans share common ancestry with, say, other apes who also share common ancestry with the rest of mammals, and so on until you get to essentially all of life. Do you think that would cause you to basically either change or lose your faith in God? Like, would you stop being a Christian as a result of that?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Like I said from the beginning, you could be a person who believes in all of evolution. You could be and believe in Christ, and you can be an old Earth creationist and believe in Christ, and a young. And all people, it's not a salvation issue, the age of the Earth. I wish people would realize that. As far as the other things that you said is, there's a lot of things in there that would be for a big discussion, actually, because that is a lot of stuff you just asked right there. First, I don't believe that we have a common ancestor, so no, that wouldn't change my mind on that form. No, absolutely not.
Can I suggest a place you might want to go to look into some of the counter arguments to Christian creationism, which would be Biologos, which is a Christian group, and they are promoting a theistic evolution view of the history of the world and life and creation and Christianity in general. And so this is a group that, I believe you actually have to be a Christian to write for them. I'm not actually sure about that, but I think it's the case. But they are on board with, the common ancestry between humans and other life forms on the planet. They're old Earth, and they
have their little mission up if you want me to just read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Science and faith working hand in hand, Biologos explores God's word and God's world to inspire authentic faith for today. So they're basically all about their mission. Their core commitments are embracing the historical Christian faith, upholding the authority and inspiration of the Bible. We affirm evolutionary creation, recognizing God as creator of all life over billions of years. We seek truth, ever learning as we study the natural world and the Bible. We strive for humility and gracious dialogue with those who hold other views. We aim for excellence in all areas, from science to education to business practices. And then they have a history blurb. This group actually has annual reports about what goes on in their fucking group. Go figure. Wow.
I was mentioned in Biologos too once, actually.
Biologos invites the church and the world to see the harmony between science and biblical faith as we present an evolutionary understanding of God's creation.
Yeah, because what they're trying to do is they look at the scientific evidence and they try to explain it using religious understandings, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with that, really, but what?
I put the link in the chat.
Yeah, there, go check out the link.
There you go. Yeah, so would that be something that you would be interested in taking a look at? Because, it's this resource that I've definitely sent various Christians to when I say, look, you can... AIG, CMI, etc. are not the Christian stance on these topics.
Nope.
Like I said from the outset, I'm willing to learn new things, investigate new areas, but like I said, my foundation is the Bible as my starting point.
Well, Biologos, like I said, they are a Christian group. As far as I know, primarily Protestants, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you're probably a Protestant.
Oh, honestly, I wouldn't classify myself as a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever. I classify myself as a believer in Christ.
Okay.
I mean, that's...
Well, I'll bet the Catholic Church wouldn't be willing to classify you as a Catholic. Would that be accurate?
Well, that'd probably be true.
Okay. and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that the Eastern Orthodox Church also wouldn't classify you as Eastern Orthodox.
They'd probably all kick me out Broadway. Who knows?
Okay.
It's okay.
So-
You can come and hang out with us. We
Protestants
don't
will take anybody. They're kind of the catch-all. Yeah, Protestants are
But yeah,
catch-alls.
I would really suggest taking a look at some of their responses to the various arguments that you get in places like AIG. For one thing, it's not. I mean, it can get technical, but it's not at the level of like, well, now you're having to read the technical literature. Although I would say if it's really something you're interested in, then yeah, check out the technical literature. It's a slog, but it's very informative. And I would also say, I'm going to have to get going in about
Yeah, we got to wrap this up in about
15 minutes or so.
Well,
But,
we're going to wrap it up in probably about 2 minutes or 3.
Okay. But I would also say, if you did take a look at that, I would be interested in some kind of follow-up conversation to see if any of your positions changed, if you found any of that helpful, or if you rejected it, what your reasons were
Don't
for saying
trust
no.
the banana man.
Oh yeah, I could follow up with on stuff I research on any given day. Just shoot me a text, and yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, let's do that. I will get you Dapper's. Just find Dapper's DM on Twitter, and I'll get it to you. But on Twitter, Facebook, if you need it.
I'll get it.
But I am going to wrap this up. I am fading. This was fun. This was. These are the kind of conversations I really do enjoy. I'm sorry I have such a low energy level right now, but I don't think for a second I didn't enjoy this. I really did. Okay.
Dapper Dino.
Yeah, I really enjoy it too. My throat's getting dry. I need a drink.
I need water. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this. Tomorrow night I've got Jesse and T-Spiracy coming on, and they're going to be talking about crystals and what kind of properties they think they have, and do they do healing, and do they keep razor blades sharp? Can they propel your car, kind of stuff? So that's going to be interesting tomorrow.
As a
Same time,
Christian,
4 o'clock Pacific.
As a Christian, real quick, what do you think of crystals? Yay or nay?
They're pretty.
Well, as of what do you mean, like just in general?
Like, do you think that they have healing properties?
No, but I think they're great. I think they're cool. I like crystals though. Yeah, I like them.
I like them for their aesthetics, and obviously they do have certain piezoelectric properties, but do I think that they have any mystical healing? No, none. Yeah. But that's going to be for tomorrow night. All right, guys.
Spoilers.
Spoilers.
Magic crystals.
All right, guys. Wrapping up. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a member. Thanks for being Patreon. All my Patreons, I really appreciate them. Even though people have been messaging. They've had to go down, and I totally understand. It's been tough all around. So everybody that's still a Patreon, even though they've had to go down in amounts, I still appreciate it immensely. Trust me. So thank you guys, and thanks for being members of the channel. Like I said, I'm still trying to get out some content here, and hopefully we'll get some non-sec news on the 9th. Would be nice, but
Oh my God!
Oh, I'm sure something will come out.
I don't know, man. I really don't. I don't. But we'll see. I mean, hope for the best, expect the worst.
Eating my mac and cheese.
Even if he
I
doesn't
made
show, that'll still be news.
Yeah.
I got so irritated by Canadian atheists and Randolph Richardson's goddamn garbage that I had. I was sitting there eating my mac and cheese, having a grand old time. Then this
dinner?
garbage, no, I made it like real mac and cheese. I was having a grand old time, and then this garbage scrolls and throws itself in my goddamn face, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm doing that now. So I set up a stream and put my fucking mac and cheese to the side, and I can finally go finish my mac and cheese.
Go finish your mac and cheese. Does anybody know if Kyle went to his hearing today, or did it get rescheduled? I have no idea. Yeah, I just don't know. I've been out of the loop, to be honest with you. So
It's a good question.
it is a good question.
All right, let's go.
Let me know. I don't have a way of finding out right now.
Speaking of Young Earth Creationism, I have a scheduled interview with someone who left Young Earth Creationism for tomorrow at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to hear the story of someone leaving Young Earth Creation, hang out on that.
Yeah, those are fun stories too. I want to find people like that as well.
And maybe Mike will get to interview with you, Dapper, at some point, because AIG is garbage.
Mike, if you ever do leave Young Earth Creationism, I am perfectly happy to have you on to talk about that.
All right.
Open standing. Anyone can do it at least once as long as you're a former YEC.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Mike was very cordial on Facebook. I was like, hey, you want to come on? Because I said, any Young Earth Christians want to come on? He's like, yeah, come on, talk about it. There you go. Cordial conversations. It doesn't have to be controversial. It doesn't have to be contentious. Well, it's all controversial, but I don't think it's controversial. I just think Young Creation is wrong. There's no controversy, but whatever.
I thought we had a good time tonight.
Yes, I did too. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And thank you, Cheshire, for showing up tonight. And Dapper Dino, always a pleasure. And we are going to call tonight and see you tomorrow. Peace, guys.
Bye, everybody.